Welcome to Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm your host, Kelly Driscoll. In this episode, you'll hear part one of my conversation with Gillian Hannum from Manhattanville College. More links and information about today's conversation can be found on Digication's Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Full episodes of Digication Scholars Conversations can be found on YouTube or your favorite podcast app. Welcome to the Digication Scholars Conversations. I'm Kelly Driscoll, your host today, and this is Gillian Hannum of Manhattanville College. Gillian, I'm so excited to have the opportunity to speak to you today.
Well, it's a real pleasure for me as well. I'm a big fan of Digication, and I look forward to talking to you about some of the things we've been doing.
Fabulous. Well, we're big fans of yours too. Gillian Hannum is a professor of art history at Manhattanville and has been a member of Manhattanville's faculty since 1987. So I'm sure that has been quite a journey. And we would love to learn a little more about what that journey has been like, what brought you to the school, and different experiences that you have had there and the history of portfolios at Manhattanville.
Sure. Yeah, I have a doctoral degree in art history and came right from my PhD program to Manhattanville. And it was like dying and going to heaven because what art historian wouldn't love being in the New York metropolitan area, being able to take students to the Metropolitan Museum and MoMA and so forth. And, so I stayed. And I think I've spent exactly half my life now teaching at Manhattanville. Um, as a small college, Manhattanville engages faculty in a lot of different ways. And I've always been somebody who, doesn't like to just do the same thing over and over again. I like to try new things. So I've had lots of opportunities beyond just teaching art history through committee service and teaching in the first year program, helping to build the honors program, and then what we'll talk more about a little bit later, helping to build the Atlas program with ePortfolios. But Manhattanville actually has a long history with portfolios. Um, we began an assessment based portfolio program using paper portfolios around 1970. It was a time of
Wow.
great change. Manhattanville had been a Catholic women's college. Um, Things were changing. What had been men's colleges were starting to admit women. Many women's colleges were going co ed. At that time, the Sacred Heart Order, which had been the order of nuns that had run Manhattanville, was moving out of higher ed to focus on K through 12. And so there were a lot of changes at Manhattanville right at the tail end of the 1960s and early 1970s. And one of those things was the portfolio system, as it was called. And every student had to have a paper portfolio in which they collected samples of their work, and those portfolios were reviewed by an elected faculty board twice during the student's time at the college, in the sophomore year when they declared a major, and then the semester before they graduated. So, spring of the sophomore year, fall of the senior year. And this was really assessment
Mhm.
before anybody was using that word or before the accreditors were asking for it, because an independent faculty board looked at the student work and decided whether it was up to snuff or not.
Mhm.
Um, Around 2010, I think it was exactly 2010, when ePortfolios were sort of beginning to be talked about in the literature. Manhattanville was lucky enough to join a grant through LaGuardia Community College. I think it was funded by the Fund for Improvement of Post-Secondary Education, the FIPSI fund, and it
Yes.
was a program called Making Connections. And that was how we began with ePortfolios. And the original plan was, in retrospect, probably too simplistic. We were just going to change the paper portfolios to electronic portfolios. And some colleagues and I were sort of the lead on that. And part of that process was choosing a platform. And that was how we got to know
That's
Digication.
how we
Uh,
met. Yes.
it was one of several vendors. Vendor seems like the wrong word because it's really such a collaboration. But Digication was one of, I think, four groups that we invited in to make presentations to our faculty and staff about what they could do for us. And what we really liked about Digication and what I continue to like so much is that it strikes a wonderful balance between having really quite a robust assessment back end tool that we use to assess our programs, but also gives the students a lot of creative freedom. So, the students can make of their portfolios what they want to. And, we wanted to have both because we realized fairly early on that if it was just a sort of a check off the boxes thing, students would engage with it very much. And that the real potential was having the students see a purpose for it, as they moved from college to career. And then, over the last decade, as the interest in a liberal arts education has waned a bit naturally. We all kind of hear that, the liberal arts aren't so relevant. Nobody wants those majors anymore, whatever. We've seen that through use of ePortfolios and the reflective practice that goes with it, and some things I'll talk about in a minute that we're doing in the Atlas program, it helps to bridge between, the liberal arts and life and careers. So, we made a great choice choosing Digication at the beginning, and here we still are. Um, it doesn't mean it was smooth sailing. We had a few little difficulties. We rolled out the transition pretty well, but we rolled it out at a moment when this was right after the 2008 fiscal crisis.
Mhm.
There were financial strains at the college, there were some enrollment strains, and so forth. And the administration and the majority of faculty at that time came to feel that having this requirement for all students was an impediment to graduation. It made it difficult for students to transfer in after 2 years, and so forth. So in 2013, the faculty voted to suspend the portfolio requirement for students. But given Manhattanville's history as a pioneer in portfolios and the fact that we really saw this kind of self assessment and reflection as part of our identity as an institution, the committee that had previously sort of reviewed the student portfolios to determine whether they would be approved or not was asked to come up with a new program. The program had to be credit bearing. The previous portfolio was a requirement, but it carried no credit. So it had to be credit bearing. It had to be an elective course that students could take. So it wasn't going to be required of everybody, but it would be available. And it had to add value in terms of retention, success, and so forth. So, out of that sort of um, request for a new program, the Atlas program wound up being born. And so the idea was for a credit bearing program. Um, I was not on that original team the first year or two. I'd been on the earlier team, and then I was doing something else in between. I think I was directing the first year programmer or
Just a
something at
few
that
things.
moment. So I wasn't on that particular committee, but the committee used design thinking principles
Mhm.
to develop this new program. And my two colleagues, Allison Carson, Christine Daney, and I actually published an article in in an international journal of ePortfolio in 2018 about this whole process of designing the Atlas program. Interviews were held with students, with faculty, with alumni to develop the empathy part of design thinking. Then different models were presented, and eventually they came up with a structure a basic structure with 4 courses, one for each year of student development. And those courses really form the core of the Atlas program as it is today. We were fortunate to receive an Andrew W. Mellon Foundation grant,
Mhm.
which we had for 2 years from 2016 to 2018 to develop and roll out those courses. And at that point, I was back in the mix. I was one of the chief investigators on the grant and wound up having to write the final report for the
Oh
grant,
boy.
ba- balance all the balance all the budget and make sure all the columns
All the
added
fun
up.
things, right?
But the grant um, really was based not so much around technology, but around reflective practice. And of course, that's the heart of ePortfolio pedagogy. And, if I say so myself, I think we did a good job with the grant of, in the end, delivering exactly what we said we were going to do. So,
And I would love to know, and I think a lot of our listeners would love to know a little more about the Atlas program. One of the things that has been really exciting for us is to see the different ways that students share these e-portfolios at different stages throughout the kind of roadmap that you've developed. And how the audience can kind of shift over time, and how that plays a part. So if you could kind of speak a little more to some of the kind of pieces and parts of how that Atlas program comes together, and how the students move through that.
sure, yeah, and it's still changing and growing. We actually developed a new course that's just rolled out this semester, which I'll share a little bit about as well. So, the original concept was for 4 courses, one for first year students, one for second year students, one that's open to juniors and seniors that's offered in the spring, and one that's open to seniors that's offered in the fall. And I'll talk a little bit about each one and kind of what the content is and how we use the ePortfolio. So, the Passport class is for first year students, and it's intended to introduce the student to the history and mission of the college, to the resources of the college, to have them think a little bit about, how to improve their learning and time management and take advantage of things. Um, then we do a little bit of early kind of career exploration to just introduce them to the tools that we have in the Career Center. A little bit with civic engagement because our college does quite a bit of work with volunteerism and sort of community service, those kinds of things, and also intercultural awareness and communication. Our college mission is to train students to be ethical and socially responsible leaders in a global community. So we try to run ethics, social responsibility, and sort of internationalism really through everything. So, through a series of different exercises, bringing in speakers and panels, having the first year students interview or have sessions with some of the upper class students. They reflect on all these different activities that they have and build a portfolio, not so much for the public, but for themselves. The first year students don't have to produce anything public. Every once in a while we find one who is willing to share it in a public way, but it's really for them. Within the class they do some peer-to-peer feedback,
Hmm. Hmm.
but it's really for them to sort of document and trace their learning. All of these are 3 credit classes. We also offer the Passport as a split 1.5 credits in the fall and 1.5 credits in the spring, but most students do the 3 credit one. So it's a full course. Um, for sophomores, the focus is on choosing a major. We have a lot of students who come in undecided. I think, a liberal arts college does tend to attract
Sure.
students who aren't quite sure what they want to do. So the passport class really focuses on having the students, um, learn about different fields, different majors, working more with the Center for Career Development, interviewing faculty members in different programs. Um, they've been using the Burnett and Evans Designing Your Life book and having the students do Odyssey planning and things like that.
Oh, cool.
And again, at the second year level, we don't make them produce something public,
Mhm.
but we do have them again do peer feedback with one another and document their growth in thinking as they come to realize, what they might want to do with their
How are they
life.
doing the peer feedback?
So they do that. We set up courses in
Mhm,
Digication for each
mhm.
class. So all the portfolios are visible to all the students in the
In
class.
the
And
class?
then we ask them, in my class, the way I do it is I usually partner them up on a particular assignment, ask them
Mhm.
to read their peers' reflection or statement on that, and then use the comment function to share some feedback.
Nice,
So,
nice.
yeah. So we do it all right using the portfolios.
And do
Uh,
you find that a lot of students have had peer review at that point in their education, or is it new for most?
I would say it's mixed. I think we're
Mhm,
finding more of it than we used to.
mhm.
Just over the 10 or 11 years that we've been doing it, I think we're finding more students who are used to sort of doing peer feedback at the high school level, but maybe not so much around reflection. We find that
Right,
we need to teach the students how to reflect. Um, that's something that it seems they're not asked to do much in K through 12. They're asked to summarize things that they read, maybe. Maybe they're asked to give an opinion on something, but they really aren't asked to sort of deeply reflect. And so that's really sort of one of the first steps in all the classes at all levels. And by the way the program works, you don't need to take all four classes. You don't need to have taken the first year class to take the one for seniors. You can dip in and out however you want to. But we are finding a number of students who take more than one. So that's, certainly, good feedback for the
yeah,
program.
absolutely, absolutely.
The class that I teach is for juniors or seniors. It's called Compass, and it's offered in the spring. So I might have students who are going to graduate, or I might have students who are going to have one more year.
Mhm.
And that class really focuses on helping the students to integrate and synthesize their education, specifically to pull together their curricular and co curricular learning and to think about it in terms of how those skills that they're developing might be of interest to a future employer.
Right.
So, whether they're on an athletic team, whether they're involved in clubs, a part-time job, um, some kind of community service. We go through a series of activities. We do readings. I bring in guest speakers, and then they reflect on all of these things. One of the things that I do right at the very beginning of the class is we use the Occupational Outlook Handbook from the Department of Labor, and I
Mm,
ask them to research a couple of jobs they think they might
right.
be interested in. And when you scroll all the way to the very end of those entries in the Occupational Outlook Handbook, it talks about characteristics or qualities that somebody needs to have to do that job. It's kind of the soft skills.
Yes.
And, they're all things like teamwork and oral communication, written communication, creativity, things like that. And so I actually build the course around those kinds of qualities. So we look at civic engagement, we look at leadership, we look at teamwork, we look at creativity, we look at ethical decision making. And I'll bring in a guest speaker, we'll have some readings, and then I ask the students to reflect on where in their education they're, learning and developing those skills. And then they have to demonstrate that somehow on the portfolio. Certainly with a reflection and, as they're able also with other, you know, artifacts that they might include.
What
And
are some of the kinds of artifacts that they will share? Are most of them written documents, or are they
it's a real mix. It's a real mix. We have our music and our performance students who put
right,
up
right,
video, audio. Sometimes we have students put up things that they do, perhaps in an interview, in an internship, where they might be developing social media or something like that. They'll put up screenshots of projects that they've done. Students in art and design will put up images. Um, Students who are student athletes sometimes put up video clips
of
to
course,
demonstrate
yeah,
something there. So again, that's one of the things that is terrific about an ePortfolio platform is that it is so versatile. So they really enjoy that, and one of the portfolios that I think we're going to do a peek at in just a minute. The student's bilingual, and I said, well, use your ePortfolio to show that you're bilingual. So she
right,
has writing, she has audio demonstrating that. So, and in this particular class, the students for their final project need to actually create a public portfolio, and so we're going to, show you just a couple of examples of the kinds of things that students have done in this class. But this is the student that I was just mentioning who puts up some written samples of her work in Spanish and then
mhm,
records herself also reading that text in Spanish. And, I just think this is such a wonderful tool. It's one thing to write on your resume that you're bilingual. It's another thing for somebody to be able to see that.
absolutely,
And
absolutely,
then
and you
the
oh, sorry, go
senior
ahead,
class,
please.
just really quickly to get through the basic ones, the senior class pursuit, Atlas Pursuit, is really all about, networking, interviewing, and again, producing a professional portfolio to use, connect to LinkedIn, embed in resumes, and so forth. So those are the four core courses. Then we have a course that we connect to study abroad. Unfortunately, with COVID, we haven't been able to do that
Yes,
for a
yes,
little while, but we hope it'll come back again. Um,
soon,
but when our students do study abroad, because we're a small college, we're usually sending them through other programs. So they'll go through what we call cooperative programs, but they're required to take a 1 credit distance learning class
mhm,
um, with Atlas ePortfolio documenting their learning in study abroad. And we have a number of prompts that they use exploring culture and education and so forth while they're abroad. We developed a 1 credit intercultural awareness class using Atlas a few years ago out of our Center for Inclusion. And students develop um, intercultural communication skills and awareness, and use the ePortfolio again to document their growth. And then we just started this semester a class in Foundations of Leadership that's focusing on developing student leadership and documenting that student leadership. So these are all sort of inter they're classes that are practical, that grow out of liberal arts, but that aren't based in specific disciplines. And they
mhm.
fit well under the Atlas umbrella, and the ePortfolio works really well to document the learning.
Fabulous. I'm curious. You mentioned that some of the students, this is the first time that they've really reflected on their work. And because you have such a long history with this, what are some of the ways that you might have um, facilitated students kind of embracing that process?
Well, I think over time, one of the things that we found at Manhattanville is that it's asking the right questions to get them
Mhm.
thinking in that direction. So it's really sort of designing and developing some prompts that will help the students to really think in a deep way about their learning. One of the students that I had, Michaela Muckle, who is now a middle school teacher, I think she was in my second cohort of Atlas Compass students. When asked to reflect about the most meaningful um, learning experiences that she had had, the most noteworthy accomplishments that she had had, chose creating her portfolio, creating a professional e-portfolio. She felt that that process of having to think through those things and to make choices and to really see what her strengths were and what she could offer to somebody was really deep learning, that it really made her think in a way that just learning, course content hadn't necessarily done. So,
This concludes part one of our conversation with Gillian Hannum from Manhattanville College. To hear part two, be sure to subscribe to Digication Scholars Conversations on YouTube, iTunes, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Digication Scholars Conversations is brought to you by Digication, a technology platform powering the most innovative ePortfolio programs in K-12 and higher education. Our website can be found at digication.com. If you enjoyed today's conversation, please like, subscribe, and share with a friend. Thanks for watching.